Hi there, and welcome to the Kingdom Sexuality podcast.
We are Paris
Alana
and Rusty,
friends who have a heart for intimacy and long to uncover God's truth and design for sexual freedom within marriage. Welcome here. Welcome back to another episode of the Kingdom Sexuality podcast. Paris and I are going to be going through a bunch of your guys' questions. I had put a questions box up, and there was so many that we didn't even get to answering that we're like, okay, well, let's just make this into an episode because there's so many good questions. So we have to go through some of these because they're too good to leave you hanging. So we'll just ask them back and forth and answer them to the best of our abilities. Because again, we're not experts.
All off the cusp.
We don't know anything. We don't know everything.
We're experts.
Yeah, exactly. No. So, yeah. And again, yes, this is just fly off the seat of our pants. Nothing's been prepared here. So
yeah, you're just getting the real deal here, you guys.
The real deal. Absolutely. Okay. So someone had asked, does anyone struggle with low sex drive? I'm having a difficult time getting aroused. How can I get aroused?
Mm-hmm. Arousal issues are a very real thing. Mm-hmm. And when we have these conversations, which we have a lot of them in our DMs and just behind the scenes, this is absolutely more common than not. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done yet, I think, in just really especially getting to the root problem of, okay, why is there so many women that are struggling with arousal? Yeah. And I think a go-to resource that we are just constantly recommending is Sheila Ray Gregar's book, The Great Sex Rescue. And she talks specific on arousal issues and why this is such a pandemic in marriages these days, in Christian marriages especially. Right. And it goes all the way back to root belief systems that we have. A lot of it stemming from purity culture, and just having overall such an unclear view and understanding of where you are in your sexuality, your husband's sexuality, and God mixing within all of that. And I think so many of us are just like, whoa, like, how does this mix, And oftentimes we'll just take on a lot of false pretenses, such as, okay, we feel like it's dirty, although we know it's not, and there's just this muddle of confusion. And so a lot of it stems from there. And then our body is just not free to respond because we have a lot of misunderstandings on our own behalf of our own sexuality, of sex in general. And a lot of times that is the basis of it. It's very much a mental thing. Arousal always starts in the brain before it starts in the body. So when you think of it that way, it's a lot of just taking steps back, start praying over that, praying into that, being like, okay, what am I believing here that is not serving my sexuality well or our marriage well? Like, ask God to really reveal that to you.
Yeah. I know. I can remember on our honeymoon, like Googling, like, how can I get turned on? Because like to get aroused, because I had no idea, because it was so easy before.
It should not be easily. Funny, but that is true. I was the same. I was so desperate. I'm like, I'm broken. Like, what is going on? I literally don't get it. And I was just thrown for a tailspin. I was like, that's it. I'm a broken woman.
I know. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So absolutely not alone. But when you understand that mind to body connection and that it does start in the mind, arousal does, then that is a big clue to helping you really unravel things from there. Truly. Okay, Alana, I'm going to ask you one now.
Okay.
A lot of people asking, did you have sex on your wedding night? And
yes.
Should I expect pain? No, you should not expect pain.
No. So yes, I did have sex on my wedding night. And no, I mean, and like Rusty we touched over this in a different episode we did. It's like that wedding night, kind of like the nitty gritty wedding night episode. I would describe it more as maybe like discomfort than pain.
And the key being if you're not aroused and your body is not fully ready for penetration, it will be uncomfortable. So
Right.
keep that in
Exactly.
mind.
Yeah.
Going back to the arousal part, that's definitely something to really explore yourself. Like, okay, like understanding what arousal is. How does this all start? And the whole anatomy of male and female sexuality too is so important to understand. You're not doing yourself a disservice then. If you don't understand something, you're just throwing yourself into it.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have some repercussions for that. And you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I wish I knew that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's so important to understand the ins and outs of a lot of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. And two, like it's something your body has never experienced before, if that's your first time, right? Like
Yeah.
it was for me. So it was kind of, your body is like, okay, this is different. Things have to stretch and, so there's a bit of like, you know, potential discomfort depending on what your arousal level's at. But yeah, I wouldn't describe it as pain necessarily, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
But I know often people can kind of make us feel really nervous for our wedding nights because they're like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like it's going to, make sure you ice it afterwards or whatever because it's going to
Oh,
be
and they'll
painful.
tell
But
you you're gonna bleed and there's gonna be tearing.
yeah,
Like, you guys, a lot of that is very far fetched.
yeah,
A lot of
yeah.
it just comes down to, this is really, really sad, and I just hate that this is reality. But a lot of it comes down to a woman's body who is not ready and a husband who is
Mm,
just ready to go. And there was a
right.
lot of miscommunication, and it's just not the way it's meant to be. So that's why we're always like, have these conversations with your fiance. You don't
Yeah.
just don't have them, get married, you're in your honeymoon suite, and now what? Like, you don't know what he's thinking. You don't
Yeah.
probably even know what you're thinking, because it's just, there was never a conversation. And that is
Hmm.
always a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's good. All right. Now, Paris, let me ask you something. Ideas for how to have more intimate conversations with a spouse that is uncomfortable talking about intimacy.
Mm, I can relate to this. Me and Neil really struggled with navigating these conversations.
Mm,
Oh my gosh, for the first few years of our marriage, we felt like it was awkward, it was
yeah.
uncomfortable. And a lot of it came down to really just us not fully embracing sexuality as part of who we are.
Mm,
That is just such a given to me. Like, when you haven't fully embraced that, it is awkward. You're just like, ugh, who is this
yeah.
reckless, wild woman inside me? I don't know. Like, can I even be that woman? I want to be, but I don't want to be, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of conflict within your own being. And until you really start to explore that and know that this is who God made you to be, you cannot detach your sexuality from you. It's part of you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
I found that for Neil and I, that was a huge piece to the puzzle that we were just not getting. It was like we were just not understanding that aspect of it. And once we really started getting there, we're like, what have we been doing? What on earth?
Yeah.
And so then conversations just came very easily. We could talk about things much more easily, because it's like, no, this is me, this is all of me. Just like
Yeah.
I would talk about an emotional aspect of something I may be struggling with. Why is it going to be that much harder to talk about a sexual aspect? It's still me.
Yeah.
It's just, there's so much dissension between your sexuality and how you actually respond to and correlate to that as a person. So I
Yeah.
found that's definitely a big part of it, is really, really digging into that.
Mm-hmm. And I think practice too. It's like if
Yes.
if you haven't had those conversations in the daylight before, right? Like when you're just sitting beside each other on the couch and you're like, "Hey, so let's talk about last night, or let's talk about, what we want our sex life to look like going forward." And you're
Mm-hmm.
like, you are uncomfortable in your own skin because you're like, how am I saying these words out loud? Like looking him in the eyes, like in the bright of the day, like we don't do
Yeah.
this. But it starts there, and it starts with baby steps of just slowly
Yes.
introducing those conversations to build up into, you know, being comfortable in them, and you get more used to it as you go, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. There's definitely a level of comfort and safety that is
Mm-hmm.
cultivated through those steps, so that it's a happy place to be when you're having those conversations eventually. It
Mm-hmm.
definitely takes practice. I like that you said that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here is a next one for you, Alana.
Okay.
What are practical non-sexual ways to build connection and growth as a couple when you're in the midst of having little ones?
Hmm. Yeah, I love this question.
Mm-hmm.
It's really good. Um, okay. Practical, non sexual ways to connect.
Mm-hmm.
I think having fun together, doing things that you
Mm-hmm.
both enjoy, even with your kids. There's so many
Yes.
moments that I feel just so connected with Jeff is when we're like out as a family together and we're at a park and he's playing with, Theo on the swings and I'm running around with, chasing after Ellis as he's crawling around. Like, I don't know, there's moments that somehow then
Yeah.
you make eye contact and you just feel like whole. You're like, oh, like
Yeah.
this is it. Like this is we're a
Mm-hmm.
family and you just feel like so full of love. And so I think having fun in those like practical nitty gritties of life, like you're just like playing with your kids, but just doing it together,
Mm-hmm.
um, making time for conversation together, whether it's like across the table while you guys are eating lunch and stuff, to be able to just stay connected emotionally. I think that would
Yeah.
be the big thing is to make
Yeah.
sure that, your emotional needs are both being met, where you're filling
Mm-hmm.
each other up, with your words, you're being generous with your words, you're using your love language, or like
Yeah.
feeding into their love language, like how they want to be loved, whether it's like touching their back as you're walking by them, if touch is their love language, or you're noticing that, okay, I can take out the trash today because, acts of service would mean a lot, things like that, where you're just keeping track of the little things. And it doesn't take an entire day. It's like, yeah, I've got little kids too,
Mm-hmm.
but I know Jeff loves it when I make him coffee. Like he loves it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm, busy with the kiddos, I can quickly put on a pot of coffee and bring it into the
Mm-hmm.
office for him and be like, hey babe,
Yeah.
like here's a cup of coffee. And he's like, oh my goodness, like thank you so much. So I don't know. It totally depends on your spouse, but I think
Mm-hmm.
just yeah, just being conscious of trying to build that connection already, I think puts you in the right direction.
Oh, absolutely. I love that you started out also with saying to prioritize having fun.
Mm-hmm.
Building into joy is really
Yeah.
such a foundation in marriage and family life and intimacy across the board, not just sex.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that is very easily overlooked, I think, especially in, I mean, like how glorified is a busy life in these days? It's
Oh,
it's crazy, right?
yeah. Oh,
And you
absolutely.
lose sight of joy and the really fundamental aspects of a whole beautiful marriage and family life. So I love that you said that. That is huge
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Okay, wait. So now I'll ask you another one here. What do you say to a friend who doesn't see sex as a priority in their marriage?
Mm. First of all, the fact that you're having these conversations with your friends, I think is awesome. I think
Yeah.
having these conversations with close, godly friends is very important.
Mm-hmm.
I know some of my most eye opening moments for understanding God's design for sexuality has come through conversation with friends. Like me and Alana all the time, we're just like talking about things. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, like Alana said something. I'm like, I never thought about that. Right. And it's just simple, innocent conversation, but it really does build into so much. And I'm very grateful for those conversations that I have with my girlfriends.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's important. I just want to say that for one. And there's absolutely friends that you'll start having these conversations with and you really quickly realize that they're in a broken place. And it breaks your own heart. And obviously that's why you're asking this question, because you want to see fulfillment there and God manifesting what he's meant, like what he's intended a marriage to have within intimacy and
Mm-hmm.
pleasure, right? So I don't know, honestly, it's such an individualistic thing. You don't know, like, I don't know if this person's maybe dealt with sexual trauma. I don't know if this person's just never had a good relationship. Maybe she's in an abusive marriage. I don't know. So many of those things really do come into play. But I think
Right.
the basis of it would be just like having those conversations, like asking those questions, like, okay, but why do you feel this way? And do
Mm-hmm.
you want to see anything differently?
Mm-hmm.
Because if they don't, you're just going to be like beating a dead horse, for lack of a better term. And it's really, really sad when it gets to that point. And I hope it's not. But from there, it's just really that heartfelt conversation, and they can be uncomfortable conversations. But I find often those uncomfortable conversations, you make them safe, they really do unravel a lot of brokenness in people. And that's really, really, really important. Just for them to feel cared for and seen in such a vulnerable aspect is a really huge deal, you know?
Yeah.
Like, to know they have a safe place to be able to share these things. And I think it's really just building off of that from there. And then, I mean, there's so many amazing ministries out there that have content like ours. You know, like, I'm constantly telling people, okay, this episode that we did, great. Give this to your friend. Be like, this is what we were talking about the other day. Have a listen to this. Let me know what you think. Let's talk about this after. You know, like, utilize godly resources for these conversations as well. Absolutely. Turn them back to scripture always. Ask how you can pray for them. You know, like, just bring it back to the whole truth of God's love and God's word over them.
Yeah. And I think encouragement can go a long way too. Like, I had a friend who was just like, I had just mentioned, like, oh yeah, like, it's been a while. She's like, well, why? Like, sex is fun. Like, this is great. Like, you should be wanting to do this. And I was like, oh yeah, right. So I think just having an encouraging, positive attitude towards intimacy as a friend, to not like join them on that bandwagon to like, oh yeah, this is so tricky, and oh yeah, it's so hard, and, you know, just go that downhill slope. But to be able to like do the opposite and be like, no, like, this is awesome. Like, what a great way to connect and whatever. So yeah.
Absolutely. Love that. Should we take one more, Alana?
Sure.
Okay. Let's do, oh, this is one that there's quite a few women that asked about losing their sex drive around birth control. I just want to say that because I want you guys to know that we hear you, but I think we're going to do a little bit more of an episode towards that. Rusty did a really amazing episode on that, actually, you guys, talking about birth control and libido. So be sure to go check out that episode that she put out there on that. Because there's a few questions on that.
I'll link it below.
That would be perfect. There is one. Okay, let's close with this one. Bringing God into healing your sexual relationship with your spouse. I think we should talk on that because I really think that is a huge aspect to a healthy marriage. What would be some practical ways for a couple to take when they're looking to maybe heal from things sexually, just growth, just combating maybe struggles that they have within the marriage bed? What would be some practical ways to encourage a couple in that scenario?
One of the first things that comes to mind would be to find a mentor, to find a couple that you can, whether it's like your pastor couple or, you know, if that's what they do at their church, like a connections pastor. Or if you know of a couple, the godly couple that you can connect with, to invest in your marriage, just to have someone to encourage you and pray over you and lift you guys up continually, to have someone, you know, that is always just going to be praying for you every day and covering your marriage in the armor of God. I think would be huge, and just a really great way to move you forward in your, not only like in your marriage, but also in like your spiritual walk, to have someone mentor you in that way. To be praying over your marriage together as a couple, bringing things together. Like, I know in the marriage journal, one of the questions every week is, you know, how can I be praying for you this week? And how often do we actually ask our spouse that? Like, I feel like we can get so busy in like the day-to-day life that we're like, oh no, like, I know what they need. I know how I can pray for them and whatever. But if we're actually asking, then we can really get, okay, no, actually, you know, this has kind of been stressing me out. Can you be praying for this? And whatever, this has actually been bugging me. So I think you get to like the meat of a person when you're asking, you know, no, really, like, how can I be covering you intentionally?
For sure.
So those are some things that come to my mind. Is there anything that would come to your mind?
I love that. One thing that has really been precious to our marriage is just reading through scriptures together and praying through them over our marriage. I mean, Song of Songs, always comes to mind, that's something that I will always recommend to people. It's like, go right back to the Bible. There's an entire book on intimacy, and God's involved in that. And it's the whole picture of it is just so perfect and so real and so relatable on every aspect. And so really studying that, praying those over yourself, go back to the Lord and his word and just utilize that within your marriage, I think is also something that is so important as well.
Hey friends, thank you so much for hanging with us today as we dive deeper into meaningful, godly intimacy, tackle the hard questions, and embrace truth while we're at it. We're also on Instagram. You can find our handle in the show notes alongside any resource links we mentioned in the show. As always, our hearts are to cultivate deep community and freedom with you guys. We are so honored to walk this journey alongside you. We'll see you in the next episode.